Hello everybody, Martin Radner here from Radner Law Group, bringing you trial analysis. Today we are going to be jumping into the Kaitlin Armstrong murder trial. And unfortunately in this case, the cameras are only going to be allowed in the courtroom for opening statements and closing arguments. We're not going to be able to see any of the witnesses or any of the evidence that comes in during this trial. The only thing that we could see is the opening statements and the closing arguments. However, even the videos for the opening statements and closing arguments, there was either a problem with the audio or just the audio was just really, really bad and really poor quality. It was very difficult to make out what they were saying in the opening statements. And the prosecutor's opening statement lasted about 45 minutes. The defense lasted about 20 minutes. So it was a lot of talking and very difficult to hear. You can go ahead and try to listen to it yourself, but luckily, I did the hard work for you, so we're going to break that down for you, tell you what the prosecutor's arguments are, tell you about the evidence that they have against Kaitlin Armstrong, and talk about some of the defense's arguments that they're going to be making to convince the jury that Kaitlin Armstrong actually did not commit this murder. So before we jump into it, please subscribe or like this video so we can continue growing and bringing this important analysis to all those people that are looking for it. So what happened in this case? The prosecutor lays out the story, and we're just going to cut through all the weeds and get straight to the main points. You've got Kaitlin Armstrong is in an on-again, off-again relationship with Colin Strickland. Who's Colin Strickland? Colin Strickland is a bicyclist. And one of the things that he does is gravel racing. It's apparently a certain type of racing when it comes to using your bicycle. There's some sort of gravel racing. So Colin Strickland that's what he does. He is a bicyclist and he's a gravel racer. Kaitlin is his on-again, off-again girlfriend, and they also happen to live in the same house. They live in the same house regardless whether they are actually in a romantic relationship or not. They live in the same house, and also, coincidentally, they run a business together. So they run a business together. They're sometimes in a relationship, sometimes not, and they live in the same home. So that's all Kaitlin and Colin. Now, there's the victim in this case, very sadly, is Mariah Wilson, or referred to as Mo Wilson. So Mo Wilson is also, she is also a world famous at this point, a gravel racer. She's really, really good at it apparently, and she's really, really top. So Mariah Wilson, so Mo Wilson and Colin Strickland actually also get into a romantic relationship. Apparently when one of the times that Colin and Kaitlin were not in one, that's when he got together with Mo Wilson, and it was a very short amount of time, but maybe for a few weeks, and then they became just remained friends. Friends that both have similar interests. So they continued their friendship later, even though they were not technically in a relationship. Well, fast forward a little bit more time, and seems that Mariah Wilson and Colin Strickland are starting to pick up a little bit more into a more serious relationship. Again, seems like there's been a little more contact right before the time when she was murdered. And Colin lives in Austin. So does Colin and Kaitlin live in Austin. Mariah Wilson does not live in Austin, but she comes to visit Austin because apparently there's some gravel racing there also. So she's coming down to Austin around the time that she is murdered. She's staying by a friend of hers house. Last name is Cash. So that's where she's staying. And it seems that, again, the relationship seems to be picking up again between Colin and Mariah Wilson, Mo Wilson. Now, something that you have to know is that Kaitlin and Colin, since they run this business together, so his cell phone is actually connected to an iPad and maybe also a laptop, where Kaitlin is able to access his iMessages. She's able to see the text messages that he's sending to people, and maybe even see the phone calls who he's calling. So, and at a certain point, Colin actually changed Mariah Wilson, Mo Wilson's name in his contacts, because apparently Kaitlin was not so excited about this relationship, and she already brought it up with him before. And even though it doesn't seem that they were in a relationship themselves, they at that time were off, but Kaitlin, I guess, didn't like Mo Wilson. Maybe she still wanted Colin to be more in a serious relationship. We don't know all the details about exactly the relationship that Kaitlin and Colin had throughout this entire time, and what was going on right during the time that Colin was already starting to show a little more interest in Mo Wilson. So, but Kaitlin does have access to his phone, and he's able to see the text messages that he's sending to people. Now, a few weeks before Mo is murdered, they're able to track this through cell phone data and through other data. They're able to see that Kaitlin was actually tracking Mo Wilson through an app that Mo Wilson actually it posts to her fans and followers to show what type of bike ride she's been going on that day. So she posts how many miles she went and posts her speed, and it's some sort of app where it tracks her and she's able to post it to her followers, and they're able to see where she's gone that day or what type of time she's making and things like that. So it's something that followers would be interested in. So Kaitlin is actually seen tracking Mo's rides. She's actually seen, so she's taking an interest all of a sudden in Mo a few weeks before her murder. Now, of course, she had an interest already before. Certainly, apparently there's been some sort of interest, meaning that a negative interest. She's not so excited by her, and I guess doesn't want Colin to be going out with her. But now she's actually taking an interest in seeing exactly where she's riding that day. Now, the day before Mo is murdered, Mo and Colin eat together. They eat together dinner, and they make arrangements to have a swim later that night, apparently. And after dinner, Colin drops off Mo. He's riding his motorcycle. He drops off Mo by where she is staying. Then he eventually goes home. That day also was a day that Kaitlin tracked where Mo was riding. Mo did a ride that day earlier in the day for a few hours. And again, she was seen accessing that information and seeing that Mo was what her schedule was and where she was, where her ride was that day. Now, after about maybe 45 minutes after Mo is dropped off at her apartment, that's when she is murdered by somebody who we are going to discuss. And the prosecution believes is Kaitlin Armstrong. Why do they believe that it was Kaitlin Armstrong? Well, Kaitlin Armstrong's Jeep is seen near this house or house apartment where Mo was dropped off. So her Jeep is in the area. Number two, the Jeep they were able to see that this Jeep was actually circling around where Mo was supposed to be staying that night for an hour before she got home. So apparently whoever was in that Jeep was just waiting for Mo to come home. And there's GPS in the Jeep, which also is able to track. And there's a trip calculator. There's a trip where it calculates how long you've been driving for. And there's a trip calculator which shows that the Jeep was at 99 miles before the murder, and then 2 minutes after the murder, all of a sudden the Jeep starts moving again. So that's another tracking device that they're able to see that whoever was in that Jeep, and this is Caitlin's Jeep, whoever in that Jeep was around the murder area and then took off right after the murder. Now also another point is that her phone, Caitlin's phone, is turned off mysteriously before the murder, and then about 35 minutes after the murder is turned back on. So again, why would she be turning her phone off? Maybe she doesn't want to be tracked. Maybe she understands that this is prosecutor's suggestion, that maybe she understands that she can be tracked with her phone. So her phone goes off, goes dead, and then about 35 minutes after the murder, all of a sudden it gets turned on again. Now she is picked up by the cops and after the murder, and she goes down and she talks to the investigator, or the detective. And then the detective, for whatever reason, doesn't believe that maybe she's a prime suspect. And he says she's free to go. He says you can go home. What happens? Immediately, she goes to CarMax. She sells her Jeep for $12,000. And she then takes an Uber to the airport and flies to Houston, and then flies from Houston to New York City. Now, during that time, the police also got a search warrant for the house where Kaitlin and Colin live, and they find a gun which belongs to Kaitlin, which is the same gun, their experts are going to testify, is the same gun that was used to murder Mo Wilson. But during this time already, Kaitlin already took a flight, sold her car, took a flight to Houston, then to New York City. Now, who's in New York City, or around that area, Newark, New Jersey, is Caitlin's sister. Kaitlin has a sister, Christina Armstrong. And what's seen is that the next day or two, she goes and she books a ticket to Costa Rica in Christina Armstrong's name. So now Kaitlin officially is in the New York, New Jersey area. Then a few days later, a ticket is booked for her sister, Christina Armstrong, to Costa Rica. And now Kaitlin actually flies to Costa Rica using Christina Armstrong's passport. Okay? Then she goes to Costa Rica, assumes a different identity, makes up a name for herself, and she gets plastic surgery. Okay? While she's in Costa Rica, another thing that she's doing is she's Googling up stuff about herself and see if there's any news articles about herself and with any connections to this murder of Mo Wilson. That's what she's doing while she is in Costa Rica. Finally, the U.S. Marshals work with Costa Rica authorities, and they're able to track her down, and they're able to bring her back to the United States, where she is charged, and now she's being tried for this case. Now, one more piece of information here is that 19 days before the trial, Kaitlin Armstrong escapes. She runs away from jail. Apparently, she's going to see some doctor or something, and she's able to run away. But again, she's apprehended, and she's brought back to jail. And the prosecutor has actually a lot of talk about that part, that the fact that she tried to run away, even though what does that have to do with the actual crime of whether she murdered Mo Wilson or not? Well, the reason why it's relevant is that there's something called consciousness of guilt. There's a doctrine where if someone who is charged with a crime acts in a way which shows consciousness of guilt by either, let's say, trying to hide certain evidence or by committing other crimes that have to do with evidence that they're trying to keep out of the court, or tampering with witnesses, or any actions that they take which show consciousness of guilt, that evidence is allowed in trial. So that's why the prosecutors a lot of talk about that, and there's going to be evidence of that. So again, very, very strong case against Kaitlin Armstrong in that she committed this murder of Mo Wilson. Now we get the defense's arguments. Now, defense's, well, really we should call it opening statements. Now, throughout the entire 45 minutes of the prosecutor's opening statement, there's not one objection by the defense attorney. Now, the defense attorney gets up, and just to give you a little understanding of what happened here, the defense attorney gets up, and the prosecutor is objecting at every possible moment. Every possible moment arguing. Now, the reason for his objections is, they're all basically the same reason, is that opening statements are really intended to be a roadmap. It's supposed to be a roadmap for what the evidence is going to show. The evidence is going to show this, and our evidence is going to show that, and their evidence is going to show this, but our evidence is going to show that. So you're just kind of giving them a little bit of giving the jury a little bit of a roadmap for what the evidence is going to show. So you're not allowed to argue your case. Arguments is really meant for closing arguments. That's when you're supposed to, in the closing, that's when you can argue away. So during opening statements, you're not allowed to say to the jury, now the reason why the prosecutor's evidence is not good is because we don't believe that they have credibility. And you should also not believe that, you should believe that their evidence, that their evidence is not strong enough, or that their witnesses don't have credibility. You can't argue that to the jury during opening statements. That's argument. You're only allowed to say what the evidence is going to show. Now, you are allowed to say evidence is going to show something different than the prosecutor said the evidence is going to show. That you're allowed to do, because again, you're just saying what the evidence is going to show. But to try to argue your case, you're not supposed to argue. So it's a little bit of a fine line, because there's a lot of times where you can really be saying what the evidence is going to show, but also suggesting why your evidence is stronger. And it's a fine line, and a lot of attorneys like to push the line. They like to go, they like to try to argue their case already in opening statements. And if it's really getting out of hand, the judge will stop it, or the other side can make an objection. But here, objections were just flying at every single moment. And I believe that certain objections that were made were actually sustained by the judge, which means that the judge told the prosecutor you cannot talk about something, which I feel should have been overruled. And it should have been that the defense attorney was allowed to speak about this. Now, I'm not taking sides. I'm not saying that the defense is right in this case and that Kaitlin Armstrong did not commit the murder. I'm not saying that. I'm just giving you my analysis of the legal proceedings about what happened and what I feel, with my experience, should have been the ruling in this case, and what I think is proper. So the defense actually starts off with, which is a great opening. I thought. The prosecutor just went on 40 minutes talking about how it's so clear and open and shut that Kaitlin Armstrong committed this murder. So the defense attorney, right away, he gets up and he says, so why are we here? Why are we here? The prosecutor just laid out for you in 40 minutes an open and shut case that Kaitlin Armstrong's guilty. Why are we here? And he says that the reason that we're here is because it doesn't matter what the prosecutor purports to say. They don't have the ability to lock anybody up. Only the jury can decide. And that's so powerful. You're telling the jury, you have a very important job here. The prosecutor can scream all day long, and they're not allowed to lock her up for life. Only you are. Only the jury is. So that was a great way to start off, I felt. Now, he starts to talk about reasonable doubt. And something that I always talk about in these videos, certainly during opening statements, is that it's very important in opening statements to talk about reasonable doubt. Whether you're the prosecutor, which the prosecutor did not do in this case, which I think is a mistake, and whether you're the defense attorney, you always have to talk about the burden of proof. You have a case to prove. If you're the prosecutor or the plaintiff, you have a case to prove. You've got to prove your case. And you have to tell the jury how much you have to prove your case by. They're going to be hearing all this evidence, and they're going to have no idea how to weigh this evidence and how much do I have to prove my case by. So you've got to tell the jury about what the burden of proof is so that they can know, as the evidence is coming in, how to weigh it and where you stand during the proceedings. So the jury can know that in their minds. So whether you're the prosecutor and you're saying, yes, you embrace your burden, you say, yes, we embrace our burden and we have no problem doing it. We're going to show you that our burden is satisfied by the time the case is done. And if you're the defense attorney, then you want to get up and say how they haven't done that. So the defense, which I think is the right move, started talking about what reasonable doubt is. And the prosecutor jumps up and objects. And you can take a look at the video. It's a little bit better on the defense's side, so you should be able to hear a little bit better. But the prosecutor jumps up right away and objects. He says, "This is argument," and the judge sustains the objection. The judge sustains the objection, saying, "Yes, it's argument." Now, it's not argument. You're just telling the jury what the law is. The law is reasonable doubt. That is what the burden of proof is. I'm not arguing it. I'm not saying that they haven't met their burden. What I'm saying is that you should be conscious of what the standard is. What is a reasonable doubt? And you can explain what reasonable doubt is. Not beyond a shadow of a doubt. However you explain reasonable doubt, you should be able to explain what reasonable doubt is within the parameters of what the law says it is. And the judge didn't allow him to do that. So I think that was a mistake. I think that the ruling should have been that, yes, of course you're allowed to talk about reasonable doubt. Of course you're allowed to talk about what your burden of proof is and what the prosecutor's burden of proof is. Then he starts talking about what, he says, you heard about all this evidence that the prosecutor is going to put on for you, all of these witnesses, all of these cameras, all these video shots, all these ring videos and everything like that. He says, but you're not going to see? You're not going to see it. And when he starts to try to talk about what you're not going to see, again, the prosecutor jumps up and says, no, you're not allowed to talk about what the evidence is not going to show. You're only allowed to talk about what the evidence is going to show. Again, he objects. And here, the judge made the right ruling and overruled his objection because, you're allowed to say what the evidence is going to show, and you're also allowed to say what the evidence is not going to show. That's also part of the roadmap. Part of the roadmap is, remember, you're going to see this, you're not going to see that. You're not arguing. You're not saying, well, the reason why, the reason you're not going to see that is because, all of these arguments, you're not allowed to do that, but you are allowed to tell the jury, you're going to see camera videos, you're going to see footage, but you're not going to see my client in the footage. Of course you're allowed to say that, because that's what the evidence is going to show. The evidence also shows what's not there, right? So the camera footage is going to show what's there, and it's also you're going to see what's not there. That's part of the evidence. So again, the objection was silly, and I think that the ruling here was correct. That of course you're allowed to see what you're allowed to say in your opening statements, what the evidence is going to show, what the evidence is not going to show. You're not allowed to argue about it, but you're allowed to say it. So, and one of the things that he says, the defense attorney says, that you're going to see camera footage. You're going to see a lot of camera footage, but you're not going to see anywhere my client on any camera footage. You're not going to see that. You're going to hear audio, and you're going to see you're going to see the Jeep, you're going to see all this other stuff, but guess what you're not going to see? You're not going to see my client anywhere on any of. And he says, and there's so much camera footage. There's so much camera footage in this case. So much surveillance, so much security cameras, so much audio, but you're not going to hear or see my client. That's a good point. That's a valid point, and that's what he makes. Also, he says that when she left the Austin department, the police department, they said that she's free to go. They didn't say that you have to stay in town. They didn't say that we're going to continue our questions later. They didn't say anything. They just said you're free to go. So why should she feel, and he didn't say this, but why? This is the suggestion. This is what the jury could be thinking. This is what he wants the jury to be thinking. So why should she feel like I can't leave town now? Of course she can feel like I can leave town. And then he says that also the evidence is going to show that she was passionate about travel and yoga. She's traveling, but she's passionate about those two things, travel and yoga, and that she would go any place, all of a sudden at the drop of a hat, she would just decide to leave and book out of town. So that's another point that he brought up. Also, he says that the evidence is going to show that she was hearing certain things about this murder that made her believe that her own safety, that her own life is not safe. That she had concerns about her own safety. And that's going to be a reason why she left town. Also, another point that the defense makes is that the lead investigator, this lead detective in this case, was never a lead detective in any other case. This is the first case where he is taking the lead. And he also suggests that he made his determination right away. He had tunnel vision. Right away, he decided that Kaitlin Armstrong did this murder without taking any other suspects into account or any further suspects that he should have taken into account. He was just too inexperienced in this. And that's basically what he was saying, that this was his first investigation where he was the lead detective. Also, he talks about another detective that was involved in this case who said that she never met anybody, that she never met a person who didn't crack under her interrogation. Even if the person was asking for a lawyer or asking if they can leave, that person, she always was able to crack and get that person to talk. So again, you're seeing that this is really not the appropriate conduct that detectives are supposed to take. If a person says they want to leave or they don't want to talk to you, or if they want their lawyer, of course you have to have a duty to go get them their lawyer, get them a lawyer. So, but this detective is going to testify that she was able to always make them crack. So that's another point. Now he also says that the experts are going to say that the DNA reporting can mean very little. I mean, this DNA evidence that they're going to say that they have, DNA reporting can mean very little. Okay, he doesn't really expound on that too much, and I'm not sure if that's going to be a strong argument to make, but he does mention that. He also mentions that the experts are going to say that ballistic science isn't a science at all. So this ballistics that they're going to be talking about, that the prosecutor has these ballistics experts are going to talk about the ballistics here, that's really not a science at all. And he also says that it's not highly regarded by members of the scientific community. So that's another thing. And then here again, the prosecutor jumps up and he objects. He says just because two people say something doesn't mean that it's highly regarded by the general scientific community. And again, the judge overrules the objection because he's just telling them what the evidence goes. He's going to have these experts saying that it's not regarded by the scientific community. So if he can say what they're going to say. So here the judge again was right for overruling that objection. Now, something was really cute that happened here, which I thought was very sharp of the defense attorneys, that after all these objections, and really you don't really find so many objections during opening statements and closing arguments. I think it's kind of an understood thing between attorneys that, unless you really have something that's completely improper and you're completely just completely doing something 100% wrong, then the attorneys will object during opening statements and closing arguments. It's kind of understanding that we have with each other when we're trying a case. But in this case, the prosecutor was just jumping up and objecting all over the place. And I don't really think it rubs the jury the right way. I know that some attorneys feel that it's very tough to always object to things. But I think a lot of times it's actually counterintuitive because I think the jury, it doesn't really rub the jury the right way. Anyway, so he's objecting all the time. So one of the defense does after one of these objections, and after the judge actually made the right ruling and overruled the objection, he says to the jury, before he continues, he says, before that objection was overruled, I'd like to, we were discussing the following. And it's kind of just a stab that this guy doesn't really know what he's doing. It's kind of like, oh, he's just objecting, and the judge had to overrule the objection. I'm sorry for that annoyance of these objections. So I thought it was very sharp, very cute of him to do that. Then he starts talking about that, he starts coming back to the idea of presumption of innocence, that he said words mean something. Words mean something like presumption of innocence or reasonable doubt. And here, again, another objection was made. And here the judge sustained the objection. And again, I believe that here the objection should have been overruled. It should not have been sustained because you're allowed to talk to the jury about what the law is. The law is that there's a presumption of innocence. I'm not arguing anything. I'm just telling the jury what the law is. The law is that there is a presumption of innocence. The law is that the prosecutor has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, without arguing why they haven't satisfied their burden, without arguing why they haven't overcome this burden. There's no reason why you can't tell the jury that there's a presumption of innocence in this case, and there's no reason why you can't tell the jury that the burden is reasonable proof. So again, I don't know why the judge felt that both of these situations she sustained the objection, did not allow the attorney to talk about this, because she said that you have to be limited to what the evidence is going to show, what the evidence is not going to show, and I think that was a mistake. Anyway, so that is basically what the defense's arguments were. Again, there is a lot of evidence, which apparently, we're not going to see the evidence come in during because they're not allowing cameras in the courtroom for the testimony and the exhibits coming in, but there seems to be a lot of evidence pointing to Kaitlin Armstrong's guilt here. The defense did poke some holes. They did make some good points, and again, all you need is one juror to agree with the defense. But I think that the defense attorney is going to have a really hard job. It's a really hard job to convince the jury or at least even one juror, that Kaitlin Armstrong actually did not commit this crime. So again, you never know what juries are going to do, but there seems to be a lot of evidence against her in this case. Certainly, there's just a lot. And he did make, again, like I said, the defense made some good arguments, but he certainly has his work cut out for him. So you never know what a jury's going to do, and therefore it's silly to try to guess what's going to happen. Juries can do anything, and we will see what happens in this trial. We will see you next time. Please, if you haven't yet, subscribe and like this video so we can continue growing. Thanks. See you next time.